Loose turns for many can be one of the hardest to negotiate when you're out mountain biking. The fact that the ground underneath it is hard pack, you've got rolling rocks or loose soil on top that just want to wash away and your tires don't want to dig into them. So how do you go about riding these? Well, this is going to be our guide on how to negotiate loose turns. So why haven't you got that traction? Well, what's actually happening is when you lean the bike over and you try to dig those tires in, if you're in normal dirt, they would actually dig in. But because these rocks are loose on top of a hard packed ground, what's actually happening is that the tire can't dig into the dirt and those rocks are just sliding, causing the bike to sort of almost slide out of the turn. So how are you going to counteract this? Well, the big key is to be loose on the bike. You don't want to be grabbing in tight, really rigid upper body. You've almost got to think about it as kind of just working with it, letting the bike move a little bit beneath you, sort of try and work the terrain so that you're kind of not fighting with it. The tires can move a little bit from side to side, and it does take a huge amount of practice, but we've got some key tips coming up to help you with that practice. So how are you going to get that loose feeling on the bike? Well, it comes from a multitude of things. The big one is you want to use your heels. So you want to be able to rotate them back and forth on the pedals. You want to have sort of soft hips, so they're not tense. Your torso wants to be tight, but your hips loose so they can rock from side to side. Your shoulders, sort of, you've got a bit of movement sort of so you can wiggle them around. And then you're going to have your arms a little bit bent. And the grips, you don't want to be gripping on really tight. You want to be sort of light on the hands, just so your palms are on the grips, you've got your hands around, and of course, you're covering the brake levers. And then from there, you can really just sort of move the bike around, and you can even practice this on a fire road before you get onto these loose turns. So what sort of position are you going to want to be on the bike? Well, you want to be in a fairly neutral position, and by that I mean you want to have 50% weight over the front and 50% over the rear. You want to have your elbows bent, and then what you're actually going to find, depending on the turn, is that you might actually lose traction on the front or the rear wheel. If you lose a little bit of traction on the front, then you want to slide your weight and just put a little bit more pressure on that front tire so those side knobs can really dig in and you can find the grip. On the rear wheel, it's exactly the same. So if you feel that the rear is starting to sort of slide out, slide away from you, then what you want to do is just slide back almost from the saddle and just put a little bit more weight on. Naturally, I already do this, and it just comes with a lot of practice and becoming comfortable on the bikes to really be able to attack those loose turns. Quite often when I'm riding these loose turns, I actually unclip from my pedal, dropping my foot down, and this is even easier if you've got flat pedals. What it really allows me to do is just evenly distribute my weight across the front and the rear tires, lowering my center of gravity so I can really push into the turn to find the maximum amount of grip. Plus, if I do feel that the bike is sliding away from me, I can just dab my foot and it'll lift the bike back up. This just gives added confidence when riding those loose turns. Coming into this turn, which is just below me, I've got a bit of a flatter section here. The dirt is still really loose, but because you're actually going in a straight line, if you dig your heels in and you actually brake on this surface, you're going to slow down. Then coming into the turn, I've actually got a bit of a rock face here, which I know is solid terrain, and the back wheel, so long as it's relatively dry, I know will dig in and allow me to brake. At this point, I almost want to think about coming off those brakes so that when I'm coming into the turn, I'm feathering them, if anything at all. And I'm coming into the turn and the tires are actually starting to use those side knobs. If you're braking hard in the turn, what you actually might find is the fact that the tire is doing two jobs at once. So you're braking and you're cornering, whereas if you're off those brakes, it's just going to be the corner knobs that are being used, and they're going to be digging into the dirt, trying to get you as much traction as possible. The other thing to note is that if you've got a rut or a slight berm surface, that's where your grip is going to be, and that is where the bike can sort of slide into, find the grip to accelerate you and get you going into the next section with a little bit of confidence, and you know that the bike's not going to be sliding away and up those rocks, up the face of that berm. The weather conditions can really affect how loose those trails are going to be and how loose those turns are. If we look here, for example, they are absolutely bone dry, and that's really what is making it loose, because the rocks have got nothing to stick together. But if we get all scientific, get a little bit of water, just wet down the trail, instantly you can just see that it becomes a little bit more hard pack. And pushing the bike into that, you've got a lot more grip to really accelerate out of the turn. Likewise, on muddy trails, they're going to be slippery and loose as well, and the same applies to them. So there we go, how to ride loose turns. Remember, it's all about body position, being loose on the bike, braking, and trying to be a little bit aggressive with that bike when you're leaning it over. If you want to watch some more videos from GMBN, why don't you click just up there for a pro how-to with Bryn Atkinson on cutting, and if you click just down there, you're going to get to cornering the comprehensive guide. Out that way is the sea, so click on that to subscribe because you'll get a great video every day of the week.